Right, so let's move from eye-watering prices down to something that most people listening to the podcast can afford, the new Marantz Cinema 60.
Yes, so it was the Marantz Cinema 60 DAB, and I quickly lost the reference to DAB additional to the Cinema 60 in the review because I didn't want to keep saying it. And this is fundamentally the Cinema 60 that is available widespread. The Cinema 60 without the DAB tuner is only available sort of to the custom install market. So it is for £1,300, a 7.1 channel receiver, or it has 2 subwoofer outputs. So depending on which convention you follow, it could either be 7.1 channel or 7.2. But fundamentally, it's 7 speaker channels with 2 subwoofer outputs. It has 100 watts per channel, 2 channels driven, which should be enough for most living room sized systems without too demanding speakers. As expected for sort of modern AVR at this sort of price point, it comes with both Dolby Atmos and DTS-X. What it lacks, though, compared to AVRs further up the Marantz cinema range, is it doesn't have IMAX enhanced, and it doesn't have Auro 3D. Auro 3D.
Both of which I think you can pass on.
Yes, exactly. I think Auro 3D has its fans. IMAX Enhanced I'm not so convinced about, but Auro 3D for music, certainly, and there is a small
The upmixer is fantastic.
Yes,
Auro 3D
exactly.
upmixer is probably the best on the market.
I would agree, which is why I'm a little bit of a fan of Auro, because for music, actually, it's one of the few upmixers that I actually quite like listening to music on, because you can alter the Auro effect. So you can tone it right down, so it's only very subtle, and it is very competent. So as I said, 7.1, 7.2, which means that if you want ceiling speakers in your system, you are going to have to forego having surround backs, and the surround backs on the Cinema 60 are fully assignable, and Marantz actually provide you with a huge amount of flexibility with reassigning them. You could have them as front heights or front tops or Atmos modules. If you have upfiring speakers, you can have them as a second set of main speakers. You could use them for bi-amping your main speakers. You could use them for a zone 2. There's really sort of a huge amount of flexibility in where you assign the surround back speakers. But I used them as front heights in the when I was testing it. There's a trade-off there because actually having surround backs does add a huge amount, I find, to the immersiveness on the sort of listener level speakers, and I wouldn't sort of ideally go without having surround backs. So you need to sort of choose which compromise you take. Do you go without surround backs and have the height level information in Atmos tracks and assign those to ceiling speakers, or do you have the more immersive listener level situation?
It's an interesting point, that because again, it comes down to preference, but just looking at the way Atmos is used at the minute in terms of height, in terms of how a lot of things are mixed, I'd go with 7-channel horizontal plain.
Interesting.
If that was the choice, that's what I would go with. If I had the room behind me. If I didn't have the room behind me, then obviously you go height. But yeah, at this level of the market, that's the way personally I would probably go with that.
Yeah, and it really is a tough call, and I'm personally sort of on the fence, and I think I would go one way or the other depending on the movie. There are some movies where I would really want that extra height information, and the thing is, for most people, they're not going to just install a set of ceiling speakers in case they want to assign the ceiling speakers for that particular movie. I mean, in my system, I'm kitted out for a large number of speakers, so I was able to switch if I wanted to. I mean, the way I set it up though was to just use them for height speakers, and actually I probably would go with that for the majority of the test movies that I'm used to, because that added height level information expands the size of the front soundstage. That's the thing I find most valuable. You don't get a huge amount of overhead effects all the time in Atmos tracks, but you do get this larger front soundstage if you have the front heights active, which I really enjoy. Like maximizing the size of the front soundstage, for me is like one of my main aims with my systems. So that's what I went with that. But as I say, there's plenty of flexibility on offer from Marantz. And this the Cinema 60 also features the new, slightly more polished user interface that I've seen on a relatively recent Denon review, which is a nice, clean interface, and it's I think it's 1080, so they've upped the resolution, and it just feels a lot more polished. The one this has been a bugbear of mine for years. The one notable improvement that Marantz has with this is the remote is absolutely fantastic. I think it's the first AVR remote in a AVR I've reviewed where I haven't just panned the remote and whined about it, because usually it's an afterthought for AVRs, and usually they are sort of visibly cheap, often with horribly spongy buttons, and not a very sensible layout. Whereas with the Cinema 60 and in fact the entirety of the Cinema range, they've clearly thought about the remote, and it is elegant and it looks lovely, and it feels great in the hand. All the buttons are very sensibly laid out. All the key buttons are there, and it's backlit. So it does everything that a good AVR remote should do, really. And so well done, Marantz, for finally recognizing that people who pay over £1,000 for an AVR actually want something nice in their hands to control it on a daily basis. So I was really pleased about that. In terms of room EQ, it's Odyssey on the Cinema 60. If you go further up the Marantz range, you get access to Dirac, but you don't get that with the Cinema 60. It's Odyssey or nothing. But you can buy the Odyssey app, or Odyssey phone app, for I think it's about 20 quid, which gives you a bit more control over the target curve for room EQ. It's slightly more sophisticated, but it's still a pain to use the touchscreen interface to try and control target curves. It's a bit of a nightmare. You do also get the option of Mult EQX, the desktop app that Odyssey has released, which is actually fairly sophisticated. I've had a play around with it, but I didn't actually use it with the Cinema 60 because you need a license, and the license only operates on a per receiver basis. So if you did buy the license for Mult EQX and you used it on your Cinema 60, and then you sold your Cinema 60, well, the license goes with it. If you replace it with a new Marantz AVR, you need to buy a new license, and that's a bit of a pain, really, because it's about 160 quid for the software. But it does provide access to calibration options that's much more sophisticated than standard Odyssey, and really is approaching Dirac levels of sophistication. But I question the sort of value proposition when you're spending sort of more than 10% of the cost of the AVR on something that is pegged to the AVR. The other thing worth noting is you really are limited to 7.1 channels. You can't add power amps and then get additional channels as you can further up the range, where the number of channels that the AVR processes is greater than the number that it internally powers. That's not the case with the Cinema 60. It only processes exactly the same number that it powers. So the only advantage of including wiring it to power amps is just additional power, really. You're not getting any further channel processing. So the big question, how does it sound? Absolutely superb, just like I've come to expect from Marantz. I have owned 4 different Marantz AVRs or processors over the years, and I'm a big fan. I think they do an excellent job of marrying comprehensive feature sets, rock solid reliability, and genuinely excellent sound quality. They're known, obviously, as being particularly musical receivers compared with their stablemate Denon. And I could see there's potentially some truth there. In my experience with Denon, AVRs tend to have a slightly more forward, almost slightly aggressive sound to them compared to Marantz, which have a slightly more laid back, warmer sound. And I think Marantz's AVRs are actually deliberately tuned for that. I think they have a slight bit of roll off in the high end, and they're tuned to give a slightly warmer sound than Denon, and it is actually audible. It is apparent, and I like it. I think it's great. So I tend to favour Marantz over Denon myself, but I've had both, and I love both. I think they're fantastically competent products, and the Cinema 60 is just the latest in that.
Excellent. Good stuff. So it got a recommended badge.
Yep.
The review is up. It has been up for a few weeks. So if you want to get stuck into that a little bit more and find out a little bit more about it, then Doug's review is up there. Doug, thank you very much for your reviews.